Good evening. Welcome to our third episode of what we're tentatively calling That Christian Panel. Although I did get some good recommendations for names for the panel, including The Return of the Gentiles and Ecclesiastic Boogaloo. If you have suggestions, keep sending them in. Anyway, tonight I'm very excited. If it's your first time here, this is a panel. Brahma was like, why don't we start doing a panel where we just have people who happen to be Christians come on and review films or talk about culture? And so this is our third one. And we're going to start trying to do these now, like every 2 weeks. We'll try to make it a regular thing now. So please welcome tonight, first of all, our special guest, GOTHIX. Welcome.
Hi.
Welcome to the
Thanks for
panel.
having me. Excited to chat with y'all.
Yes.
Excited to have you here. And you had already seen this movie that we're going to be talking about.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I have seen the material we will be discussing. Yep.
So you didn't even have to cram it like me. I felt like the night before a test, I was like, I got to go watch this for the next 2 hours.
Rough. Yeah, no, I think I saw it like opening week.
Cool.
Yeah.
And then, of course, returning, we have Michelle from Force of Light. How are you, Michelle?
Good to be here. Yeah, every time we do this panel, I'm not at my typical place. So
You're always traveling.
I know, but good to be here.
And then we have, of course, Mr. Brahma Bull, who tonight, with the smoking jacket and the black and white, you look like film noir.
Yeah, just need a pencil thin mustache or something, right?
I love it.
Yeah, I hadn't heard of the movie, hadn't seen it either, so I watched it a couple times yesterday. So I kind of crammed it in too. But yeah, I think we'll have plenty to talk about on it. It was good.
So too. Well, Odin said he might be a little late joining us, so why don't we just get started with opening thoughts of if you liked it, thumbs up or thumbs down, like just overall thoughts first of all.
Who wants to start? We're all
thumbs up. Yes, I liked it.
I liked it from our perspective. I don't know how much a normie or non-Christian would like it all that much. It's not necessarily one that is too much like the old faith-based movies that it's boring, but it is pretty steeped heavily. You know, it's got a lot of the Christian stuff in it because that's what it's about. So, unlike Nefarious, where we were saying, yes, everybody would like this movie because it's just a good movie. This one is way more targeted at the Christian crowd. So,
yeah.
But I thought overall the acting was great. The story, I mean, it's based on a true story, so it was good all around.
Yeah, I actually thought that in terms of non-Christians liking Jesus Revolution, I thought that they would like it more than Nefarious, actually. At least for some of the criticisms that I saw, a lot of people thought Nefarious, it's like a lot of the context they were using in the dialogue, it seemed to be like very, I guess their explanation is, it seems like they're trying to force something down our throat is what I was hearing. But like, I don't know. I feel like a lot of people would enjoy watching Jesus Revolution, even if you're not Christian, because like it gives you a perspective of what an alternative life could be aside from being a social justice warrior or doing drugs to feel free. Like it gives you a different perspective that I think a lot of people haven't considered.
Yeah. No, that's an interesting. Yeah, I think I can see that as well. I love this movie. The first time I saw the trailer advertised, I was like, "Ooh, I want to see that." And that's kind of something new because I never, even though I'm a minister, like I've never enjoyed the Christian movies up until recently. Like they just didn't appeal to me. I didn't really want to watch. God's Not Dead might be good. I've never watched it. I don't know. It just never really appealed. But this grabbed me immediately from the trailer and like I loved it. I mean, because this really has to be compared to, I mean, this is a true story they're telling. And they didn't shy away from telling that story very authentically. And I mean, it touched me. There's so many scenes that, I mean, just deeply touched me. I was moved to tears multiple times throughout this movie. I mean, it's hard not to be. But yeah, the acting, I've enjoyed. Did you guys not enjoy the music selection? Even the secular music that was put in it was great.
I
Yeah.
did.
I liked it.
Yeah.
I
Yeah,
thought it
so
was
Fleetwood Mac, some Animals, House of the Rising Sun.
House of
Yeah,
the
so
Rising Sun,
Good soundtrack.
I thought it was great. I loved it. Have seen it twice, and I see what you're saying of how it may be not appealing to Christians, but I also see what she's saying about how it could, if someone does at least give it a chance, it could offer this alternative view.
Yes.
Yeah.
Welcome
Odin.
to Odin.
Hey,
Hello.
sorry, I am late. Was trying to wrangle a toddler. So
No
That's
worries.
okay. We needed another bald and another guy, so I'm glad you got here.
We're just kind of giving our overall thoughts about the film.
Mm-hmm.
So, so far, everyone who's talked enjoyed it. What did you think of it?
I hated it. No, I'm kidding.
Really?
I'm only actually, I'm going to be honest. I was only have enough time to get about 45 minutes into the movie. But what I'm watching so far, I'm actually really enjoying. And I'm definitely understanding why there are so many people that kind of reached out to say, hey, why aren't you talking about this more? Why aren't you talking about this more? Why haven't you reviewed this? Because I always have and I think there's good reason too, there's always the perception that any film that has like Christian themes or elements is not going to be that great, because there's a lot of just examples of those kinds of movies. And just, again, I haven't seen the whole film, but 45 minutes in, it's a well-made, well-directed, well-produced movie with really only like minor nitpicks that I have for it.
So, as a joke, I was going to boot you from the room when you said you're not finished with it. But I'm not, because this is a Christian panel.
Yes.
And Odin, I know you're because Odin, I know you're into this type of stuff. This is made by the same guys who made American Underdog.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
That's another film I never got to see. It's one of the longest titles.
Okay.
Because isn't it like American Underdog, the Kurt Warner story or something like that?
Yes,
Yeah.
with Zachary Levi.
Yes.
Well, I
do wanna
loved
see
it.
that.
And I wanted to thank you, Michelle, for recommending it, because I started it once before you recommended it, and I was like, this is boring, and I turned it off. And then I watched it for this. I loved it, and I cried during it as well. I got kind of emotional, and I was wondering, kind of the question that you were saying, GOTHIX, like, would non-believers be as interested in it or as open to watching it? I'm not really sure. I don't know. I think maybe because they bring in the hippie aspect, and it's at the beginning, you're not really sure what's going to happen. So for anybody who doesn't know, Jesus Revolution is based on an autobiographical book. And it was, it's talking about this movement that happened. It's about all these hippies who started turning, what did they say? Turning off and tuning into God.
Yeah.
And this sort of mass revival that was happening, and people who had tried everything else. And I think it really, to me, it touched me, because at the beginning, when the one hippie pastor, whose name is Lonnie Frisbee, it's hilarious, that's his real name, I looked it up. When he first is meeting this more straight-laced pastor, Chuck Smith, he tells him, sort of that he's tried everything. He was searching for truth. He tried everything. He searched with drugs and all these different ways. And then he finally found truth. He found God. And that really hit me emotionally, because that's a version of my story, a version of what happened to me. So,
Yeah.
I mean, Keri, like the part that, like, even when they released the clip before the movie came out, and I mean, maybe it's because I'm an evangelist, I don't know, that just, I mean, brings me to tears both times I've seen it. And even before it came out, they released the clip when Lonnie is going over how these people are searching for something and how there are people without a shepherd. Like, I just was bawling, because I mean, it's so true. And you see that today. I mean, GOTHIX has already said it, kind of with the SJW crowd.
Mhm.
Like, they're kind of the modern hippies of today.
Yeah, it's I like to say that everyone is a sheep. It's just a matter of who are you allowing to shepherd you. So yeah, I can definitely. I cried a lot in that movie watching that.
did the men cry?
Oh, my husband was crying his eyes out.
Halfway through, I've not cried yet, but I kind of feel a similar emotion, at least, with how powerful it was, because it also reminded me a lot about some of the, the ancient church fathers and saints of the church, like St. Augustine, right? Because his story is very much about that, right? He was literally searching for truth. He was searching for love, and he basically went through every single religion, every single thing you think of, in a lot of ways similar to the story of the hippies in this, right? Trying all these other things. And the thing, that Lonnie Frisbee says, I tried all of these things until eventually I kind of just hit a wall. And that's when for him, he found God. And so I think it's almost like that, the story that seems to be just perennial, right? There's always some new group. There's always some new understanding of the world that is showing that truth. That is, our hearts are restless, right? And again, that's what Augustine tells us. And I think that is something that is just so true about the human experience, is that we're constantly hungering, and sometimes we don't even realize that we're hungering for God.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's trying to find something to fill the God-shaped hole in your soul. Yeah, and I think the SJWs, I mean, we have said that that kind of liberalism, leftyism more so, is kind of a religion unto its own self. It's what they are filling that hole with. So yeah, it is a constant search, and hopefully people do find God, because he actually does fill the hole rather than create more misery for you.
Absolutely. And something too that's so touching about this, I mean, so many things are touching about this movie, but even in the beginning, when you see Chuck Smith, like, he's just so over it. Like, he's been a pastor for so many years at this point. He's bored with the church crowd. Like, it's just, he needed he needed this movement as much as the people needed this movement. Like, it revives him and like his love of God. And that's even like the scene where, I mean, I can see that as a pastor, where you've got the people that walk out. They're like, no, we don't want these people here. And the old man walks over and joins them. There's just, I don't know. There's just a lot of sweet moments in this movie.
Yeah.
I could see how some people would see it, especially maybe if they're not believers, as cheesy. I saw somebody before we even started said it's corny. I thought it was going to be corny and cheesy too. And yes, there might be some corny aspects to it, but it's actually genuinely touching, because I think it's showing these universal truths. And one of the things is, my husband laughs at me because I will yell at the TV. I'm one of those people. And I was like, at the beginning, when he's inviting all the hippies into the church, and some of the more straight-laced people you're talking about who have been there for a while and they don't like it, I'm yelling at the TV because it's like, this is the way it should be. These people are broken. They are broken. And when they first come into your church, they're not going to be on the same page as you about every part of doctrine, because they're like in need of a spiritual hospital. And so if they're coming in this state, it doesn't mean, I want to make sure nobody misunderstands me. It doesn't mean you tailor your sermons to whatever the world is bringing in. No, it doesn't mean you change the gospel so that they're not offended. No, but if they're willing to come in and listen to the word of God undoctored, then don't make them feel bad about like where they're at right now. I don't know if that makes sense.
It is.
Thoughts
absolutely.
on that?
It's ancient. If you think about the early church, I mean, I don't know if everyone knows the word kerygma, but I mean, kerygma is like, it's the foundational elements of the faith, right? Of Christ, Son of God, right? Just the very basics. That's what you always start with. You start with the kerygma. And then once you get the kerygma, like once you are able to formulate that relationship with Christ, that basic understanding, that's when you start to build. But you have to, as you said, like you have to have them in, right? You have to say Christ wants you, right? Christ and God desires you in all of your faults, but it's through God that your faults become transformed, right? That your faults become, that God helps you fix those faults that you have. And you can only do that if you invite God in. Yes. The church needs to be that body that invites them in, like Christ.
Yes, because it shows. And I mean, so many get caught up in what I would call religiosity, where it's not that we don't have our traditions and things like that. That's not what I'm saying. But when we're so holden by them that you don't allow the Spirit of the Lord to breathe in to what God is doing right now. And that's kind of what those older men represented. They were holding on to a form of how things in their mind are supposed to be, instead of seeing what God was doing in that moment.
Yeah.
Which is just like Israel. I mean, Jesus literally said to them, you missed the day of your visitation. Like they were so stuck on the form of what they thought Christ was going to be, that when he came in a way they didn't really expect it, they missed the day of the visitation of the Lord. And we as Christians can do that in our current culture if we're so rigid on like our forms of how things are supposed to be.
It almost kind of reminds me a little bit of the parable of the wedding feast, where, you know, the invitations are sent out and what happens? They say no. They reject it, right? They're like, I don't want to go there. So it's almost like the same thing in this movie when they're invited in and you have some people say, well, I don't want to be here anymore. I don't want to be here with them. But again, there's just so much depth to it, because while you have all of these outcasts that eventually are invited within this parable, you then have that one who does not have the wedding garment, who is then sent out, because it says once you're invited, right, you're invited to come in, right, and you're invited with open arms, but there has to be that change, right? There has to be that wedding garment that you put on, right, the charity of God, right, the charity of Christ. And that's what I think this movie does really well, is it kind of builds upon that too. There's so many, I mean, I don't know if y'all mentioned it, but there's so many really great moments, like the way the opening shot is filmed. Immediately I thought, because I didn't really know much about Jesus Revolution, so at first when I saw that, all you see are the feet, and you see him walking on rocks, and you see a long dress, and say, oh wait, is this set in biblical times? I don't know. And then it pans out, and then you start to see like the purses and stuff. You're like, okay, clearly not that. But then they're on a mountain, and you're like, okay, Sermon on the Mount. I'm getting that imagery here. And then it kind of further expands out. So I like how they kind of built upon those religious imagery there.
Yeah. It's the cinematography, I think, is gorgeous in this movie.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the other thing that they showed with the older men at the church and stuff is really the state of a lot of churches.
Yes.
They don't. The church, a lot of churches are dying because, I mean, it is just the same people are there all the time, and then, you know, some people fall off or stop going, whatever you want to call it, and yeah, you see that in a lot of small churches. You've got to not reinvent, but you've got to welcome more people in. You've got to make it feel like it's an actual family, like it's an actual church, so people want to be there. When it starts to feel like a business, which is what those guys were making it, because basically their whole argument was, yeah, these guys are not going to be bringing money, and that's what our church needs, because they're hippies. So, I mean, it was the wrong attitude, and I think they expressed that very well in the movie.
That scene in particular, when I was watching it, it actually spoke to me on a different level because of how drastically different the outward appearance was from the people that were already in the church versus the people coming in. And that's something that I can definitely relate to, where like I'll still get comments to this day of just like questioning just how I dress and present myself, because I'm supposed to, you know, I guess Christian is supposed to fit this specific mold. And I get lots of emails from people too that reach out to me because, oh, thank you for being a Christian who is somewhat gothic or is into the rock scene. And I'm like, well, where are these people getting this from? Like, you know what I mean? And I think of all these interactions I have with individuals who I think they should be celebrating and rejoicing once someone enters the kingdom, instead of nitpicking every single thing about them, instead of allowing them to grow. You know what I mean? It seems a little counterintuitive.
Yeah. Because I see that happen a lot online too, because I know Melanie Mack has gone through that as well.
Yeah.
Where like, and she shares some of those comments sometimes where it's just like I love being told about how I can't really be Christian because I got a bunch of tattoos, and it's like, what?
Yeah.
That's this, since this relates to what we're talking about right now, I will read this one thing from the chat. Thank you, Bros and Bros. He says, I think one of the worst things churches have done is water it down to draw in more people. I believe more people would attend if it was more adherent. I agree with you, actually.
Yeah.
And when I'm talking about making it welcoming, I don't mean watering down the sermons or the message or the gospel. What I mean is having a spirit of joy and welcoming new people, and not making them feel like, you know, you're in some club and you're on level 12 and they're entering at level 1 and they don't, you
Yes.
don't know the way we dress. You don't know what we think about, I don't know, wearing shoes and, all these inconsequential things about whether or not they're wearing shoes at the end of the
Yeah.
day. It's like,
Mhm.
shut up. Like,
Something a
Yeah.
little
let's
bit
go to
more
church.
than the 2-minute introduction where
Yeah.
they ask you to turn to the people to the left and right of you and say good morning. I mean,
Yeah.
Mhm.
a little bit more than that, a little more effort.
Yeah. That's actually one of the reasons why I've always hated that.
Yeah.
Because at the church that I went to before COVID, they had that at the beginning. And so I was the person where I was like, I'm just going to go ahead and kneel and pray because I don't want to talk to anybody.
Right.
But it's more because I think more because like one, I'm an introvert. So like that's part of it. But then also it almost seems like that fake, like, oh, good morning. How are you? But it's not real,
Yeah.
And so I think that's part of the reason why it's always kind of bothered me. But
My-
You have to make
my-
it real. Turn around and high fives.
My church does the same thing, but they call it Christian mingle, which I hate. And they do it for like a minute before the worship starts. I'm like, oh boy.
I will say that's one thing I liked more at my church doesn't have that minute where you do that, but I have been in churches that do it. I've been in some Catholic churches that do it, and it does feel forced and very stiff and awkward. But when I first started like on this path of finding God, trying to find truth, I was going to this more like a non-denominational spiritual center out in Los Angeles,
Hmm.
and they weren't as sound on the doctrine. They weren't, but it was the only place I would have gone at that point. I wouldn't have walked into a Christian, an explicitly Christian church. They talked about God, but they brought in New Age stuff as well, and they brought in Christianity, but they brought it anyway. That was the first place I went. But one thing that I liked is they had one of those greeting moments, but it was real, and people were like hugging and like, they
Yeah.
weren't just, they were really felt it. Like I felt like they really were happy I was there. It was crazy. I loved that feeling.
yeah.
I
That's
don't
one
know.
thing a lot of places sometimes are missing is the feeling of family, right? The feeling of
Yes.
family and I think that's what like you were kind of getting at with, that's what you mean by welcoming, because it's interesting, right? The churches that are not as welcoming, just like the one that was in this, movie in the beginning, right before the pastor kind of went through this change, is similar to a lot of churches as well that currently exist today that are losing people. But then at the same time, the other places that are losing a lot of people are the ones watering things down, right? When they actually are watering down. So there's that fine balance of, again, I think going back to say, focus on that charisma, right? Focus on the core teachings of Christ. And then once someone has been able to develop that relationship, then that's when you start to say, all right, let's dive a little deeper, right? You've got the service level understanding, and you got to have that first. Now let's dive a little bit deeper. And then that's when you can start to, maybe further evangelize and further teach. But you have to have that basic foundation before you can get anywhere.
Yeah. Yeah. And so much, and Odin already brought it up, charity. So much as far as just people feeling welcomed is just that sense of, I wrote my dissertation on holiness, and it's like true holiness and love go hand in hand. They're like there's holiness on one side of the coin and there's love on the other. Like you can't truly be a holy person, a person who reflects the image of God, without being a loving person. And I feel like a lot of times that is missing. And I don't mean love in the way that it gets watered down to do whatever you want. Because love in scripture is, if you love me, you'll keep my commandments. But I think that's what we're kind of hitting on. You can still preach the word of God and preach truth and not water it down. But the church, if that's happening, there should be the fruit of the Spirit, which is ultimately love. And that does welcome those, and love is willing to realize someone who just walked through the church isn't going to know all the quote unquote rules that you know,
Or follow them.
yes,
Like when I
yes.
first
Yeah.
started going to church, I was living in sin on a number of things. But I was a new believer, and it was like there were women who were willing to tell me firmly what they thought about me living in sin, but also not say, hey, you can't come back to this Bible study, or you can't, it was a welcoming environment. Now, I think that, I go to a church that they will discontinue membership if you are living in sin unrepentantly and not working on it and not open to work on it. Like if you say, for example, no, I think polygamy is cool and I'm going to defend it and I'm going to argue with you, then they will ask you to leave because, you're not even, you won't even agree that it's sin. So, but if you're acknowledging the sin and you are praying to change and you're working on it, I think it's very important for like the church not to throw people out or not to have this spirit of like, you haven't fixed that yet. So, you're not one of us. I don't know if I'm making sense.
No, you
No,
are.
I
What's
agree.
the middle ground there?
And I like the distinction there because, it's like we don't want to be that, of, throwing you out. But there is a point where you're no longer really trying to actually engage and trying to actually live faith, right? Because you want to have your cake and eat it too, basically, right? You're like, oh, I
Spiritual
want to
growth.
have Christ, but I want Christ to be mine, right? It's like in Catholicism, we like to call it like cafeteria Catholicism, where it's like, I like the church and I like the liturgy, but I don't really like that teaching, so I'm gonna leave it there. I don't like that teaching, so but I like that one. It's the role. I'm gonna get this one, okay? It's like that's sometimes what we can fall into. So there is a line, right, where, and sometimes having that like you can't come anymore. That's a wake up call for a lot of people of I have gone too far, right? Especially if it's someone who's like been there for a long time where they know it and they have known it, but they've fallen away versus someone who's like new and trying to figure things out. I think that's another way to distinguish between those two as well.
Yes.
Yeah. And in other churches, we call it fire insurance. And the people who treat it as fire insurance. So, yeah. I mean, if you're not growing, if you're not producing any fruit, then you're just withering on the vine. And sometimes you got to trim a little bit to make sure that the whole plant grows.
We did have an example like that in my church where it was very specifically, that's why I thought of that as an example. But if you guys, I still have thought through that a lot, like what's the dividing line? Because if you're not a believer and you hear that, I know some people have heard that and they're like, wait a minute, your church will discontinue fellowship with someone if they're living in sin. Aren't you all sinners? It's like, yeah, we are all sinners, but it's different when you're unrepentant and you're arguing, saying, no, this thing isn't a sin. This thing that God clearly just says is like, this is a sin. You have to stop living. That's your old life.
Yeah,
right?
and there's a difference between like, because yes, we are all sinners in one sense, but I mean Paul says such as you were, but now you've been washed, you've been sanctified. Like basically he's saying, yeah, you're not that anymore. This transformation has happened in your life. You've been born again and you are no longer that. So it's like that's the difference there is, is someone stumbling in some type of sin that they're trying to get victory over, or are they just willfully living in sin?
Yes. I don't know. That's the difference in my mind, but I still think about that a lot.
I could think of it a kind of an equivalent, like from like it within the Catholic Church's perspective, right? That's what happens when someone gets excommunicated, right? Because sometimes when people think of excommunication, they're like, "Oh, that just sounds very like, official and mean." But it's essentially, and I saw someone mentioned a certain politician who used to be the Speaker of the House in the chat, and so she is someone who calls herself a Catholic, right? And yet she openly goes against, right, teachings that are not just from the church, but are even rooted in scripture. And so you look to that and you think, basically excommunication is meant to be the last step where it's like, hey, your priest has talked to you. That didn't work. Okay. The diocese has tried to talk with you and try to help you through this. That hasn't worked. Okay. Now this has to be the wake up call of, okay, you can't present yourself for communion anymore. You can't receive the sacraments anymore until, and again, it's not a permanent thing. It's no, if you are able to finally say, okay, I have clearly, not lived my life in accord with Christ, then that's when you can be brought back. Right. And so I think it's kind of a similar thing where, it's like a last resort. I imagine with your church too, where it's like,
oh
where
yes,
someone was not
it is
gonna
the
welcome
last
back.
resort. And the way that our elders have talked about it, when it happened was, it is a like you said, it's sometimes what people need. It's almost like with an addict where you stop enabling. And we are doing this because we want you to come back, to
The wake
God,
up
come
call.
back. Yes. And we want to bring you back into the fellowship. I just saw, I would be remiss if I didn't read this one because it's such a generous super chat. WG, thank you so much for the $50. He says, it's a quote from G.K. Chesterton, and it says, Christianity has not been tried and found wanting. It has been found difficult and not tried. I like
love
that quote.
Chesterton.
A good one.
And thank you, Deranged Lunatic, who says, preach it, Dr. Smith. Wait, is he talking about Chuck Smith in the movie?
He's talking about me.
Oh, you! Hey, you got the same last name?
Yeah.
I'm not a doctor. You are. And then James J says, I need some prayer. So James, that's the first time, actually, I think one of the few times people put that in the chat. We will pray for you if you want to tell us what for. You don't have to be too specific.
Or
if
you
don't
can
wanna
leave a
be,
general.
but leave
Yeah.
a general. Yeah. Okay, well, speaking of that, prayer, one of the things in the film that really touched me emotionally is when there's the guy coming in who's just crying, I need help, I can't stop this. And I assume he's talking about some kind of addiction. And everyone stops what they're doing and they put hands on him and pray. And my church does that. It's the first time I've been to a church that does that. And it absolutely moves me every time because you can feel this energy in the room, like of everyone focusing on praying for this one person and everyone kind of connecting by touching. Have you been to a church where people pray like that?
Oh yeah.
I mean, I'm Pentecostal, so yeah.
Oh,
us Catholics don't do that, but but the sentiment is understood though. That's why there are certain things within the Catholic Church why it's focused on liturgy and externals, because we know that even though our relationship with God is very much internal, right? It's very much private in a certain way. We know we need those externals to be able to really flesh out that's the reason why baptism exists, right? We know that God can cleanse us of the stain of original sin without water, but Christ chose water for a reason, because water symbolizes washing. And so it's a way for us as humans, because we need sometimes that visible thing to know that it's happening. And so I imagine it's similar in y'all's churches, right? Where it's like knowing there are people who like physically hand on you, and then hearing the prayer, like it creates that sense where if they didn't do that, it would still be real, right? Even if they were praying quietly, but it makes it that much more real because it is, tangible in that way.
yes. Wait, so GOTHIX, you said you've been to churches that do that pray.
Oh yeah. I lay hands on people too, not in a non-violent way.
Yeah, in the church way.
Yeah, in a Christian way.
I'm gonna clip
In
that.
a biblical way, right? In the gospel.
yes. But no, I agree with what you're saying about the whole visual thing too. It's like, yeah, we have faith that God is going to be faithful on his promises and that healing will come. But I think there is something to that as well. Yeah, I don't know. But yeah, we do it in my church.
Yeah, say like in our type churches or when I preach, you're going to, after they've done worship and stuff, you're going to preach, and then I'm always going to give an altar call and let people come up and I'll pray with whoever comes up. And I find that, and I say this even being one of the people that, will go up for prayer at times. Sometimes I think even just the laying on of hands, which obviously is discussed in scripture, multiple places, sometimes it's just one, there is power there, but secondly, it can also be just a sense of community yet again. Like I'm not alone, someone's here with me. And I think even that can very much uplift. But obviously in the story, you're seeing them pray for deliverance, and clearly he does get delivered.
It's yes, I agree with everything you guys are saying. It's about community. It's about, there's something about that physical touch too, that
Yes.
I've had friends who pray for me, and when they put hands on me, like you said, you do Gothic, it just means so much, we're connected in that moment. Even if you're saying the prayer around the table for like before a meal or something, if you're with a group of people, sometimes people join hands, sometimes they don't. I always find when you join hands, it's a little bit more connected. It's just, I don't know. It's symbolic. There's that human touch.
Yeah, it's so amazing because with my son who's 3, he can only understand so many things, but He knows that when we're about to eat, unless of course something else is going on, because sometimes he's in a mood and it's just not going to happen. But normally before a meal, right, we'll hold hands and we'll say grace. And so even though he doesn't understand the concept of grace, he doesn't understand exactly what's being said, he knows, oh, holding hands. Okay, I understand that. I get that, right? And so that's like from a very early age, we recognize that, right? We see these things, and that's why there are these signs, right? That's why we have the cross, right? It's a visible sign that's able to help us to better understand those things that maybe maybe it can be difficult for us to be able to explain. And that's why these visible signs can oftentimes be helpful for us.
Definitely.
Do you do the my husband was raised Catholic, and so sometimes I'll ask him to do the Hungry Catholic prayer. Do you do that one? It's a
The
fast
blessed,
one.
blessed
What
is the
is
Lord of these thy
I need
gifts.
to know the Hungry Catholic
I know
prayer.
exactly what that is. I have a Catholic friend. It's literally like super speed. She'll do this.
Blessed is the Lord. I guess
And
we're
then-
about to-
Blessed is the Lord of these thy
Start
gifts, which
eating.
thou hast received from thy bounty through Christ our Lord. Amen.
Yes.
We don't rush through it. I mean, yes, there are some that will. My favorite version of that prayer is definitely from the film Hook, though. When it's
Oh, I
like, let's
don't
say
remember it.
grace. Bless us, the Lord. Grace.
Great.
Okay, so one of the things I had on my list, and you guys feel free to jump in if there's other things you want to highlight. I made a little list. One thing I want to talk about, and this might be a spoiler for you, Odin. So if you want to duck out at any point, no worries. Lonnie
okay.
Frisbee. At some point, my husband said, "Oh, I can tell what's going to happen with the character arc here." This is before we realized it was even a true story. He's like, that guy's going to end up letting the young guy Greg down in some way.
Mhm.
Because Greg's whole thing is before he became a believer, he believed the thing he was comfortable believing is that people will always leave you. They'll always let you down. Family, anybody who calls himself family, they'll always let you down. And so that, of course, happens. Lonnie kind of lets him down. And there's this whole part of the storyline with Lonnie's ego becomes so big. And he's even fighting with his wife and saying things like, you can't do what I do. Nobody can do what I do. You're just jealous. You know, even Chuck is jealous of me. And it's this, so he can't even see it. And I wanted to talk about that because I think even as a believer, sometimes you think you might not fall into some of these traps that you fell into as a non-believer. But I think they're always there waiting to spring up and get you. So do you want to talk about that? Like being aware as a Christian, like not falling into patterns like that? Sorry.
Absolutely. Well, and like first, I want to say I appreciate that this film didn't try to make everyone look better than they, are. And not that anyone looks bad, but they show the human element, whether it's Chuck, whether it's Lonnie or Greg, there's that very human element. And again, we humans struggle with pride. I think it was maybe Charles Spurgeon who said pride is the weed that grows in everyone's garden. I mean, it definitely is. And with Lonnie, I've seen this in ministry 1,000 times. It's like if you look in the Bible, like anyone that God called, David, Joseph, Moses, for these great tasks, there was these years in like the wilderness, basically. Even Jesus, 40 days in the wilderness. And the wilderness is a time of preparation. And people who kind of skip the wilderness season, like in the case with Lonnie Frisbee, who was mightily used of God, there's still people to this day that are saved and serving the Lord as a result of Lonnie Frisbee. But when we try to kind of skip steps and when people almost get elevated before they're quite ready and prepared, it usually leads to a destruction on their end. And you see that actually in Lonnie's life. And by all accounts, from everything I've read, Lonnie made it right in his life in the end, but he did have struggles moving forward. And you see that already starting in the movie with that pride element.
Yes.
Yeah. It's one of the reasons I've never been a big fan of the mega churches. I don't see them as being a great thing for the church itself. And we've got one of the big ones here, New Life Church, and they had their issue with Ted Haggard. What is it? Almost 20 years ago now. But yeah, I mean, we definitely still see things like that happening today. And we've seen plenty of examples of it. And I think when a church gets to be the mega church size, for some reason it seems the size or the popularity or whatever it is seems to corrupt a little bit.
It feeds
Yeah.
pride. It feeds the ego.
Yeah.
And there's a reason why they're called the deadly sins, and why pride is seen as the deadliest of them, because it's the root of all sin. If you think about it, right, anything you could possibly think of, at some way, pride is going to play a role.
Yeah,
Pride,
That's why it's
absolutely.
scary that everything is done in the name of pride nowadays.
I know.
Yeah.
right?
I love that quote. I'd never heard that quote about pride being the weed in everybody's garden, because
Mhm.
that's so true.
It's
And I
very
know, even like when you think, oh, I've conquered this thing, you can pride yourself on not being prideful.
Oh, absolutely. You can be humble and proud of it.
Like, there's a lot of ways pride can get you. But I thought that was if it had not been a true story, if I just thought it was a drama, I would have thought, wow, they really thought about this a lot, about how to develop that character. Turns out it's true. It really happened, or something similar. But I like that part of the story. That also kind of jumped out at me. What about you guys? What were some other things about it that gave you something to think about, or parts that you were glad were included?
Um,
One of the
Yeah.
things that I was kind of curious about was where Chuck actually does get his money, because they made a big deal about, the church not having money and that the hippies definitely weren't going to be able to support the church. But then he's able to keep the church running, get them a place to live, and buy another church at the end of the movie. So I wish they had filled that in a little bit more. Like, were they doing community service as a large group? I know it blew up and got real big, but they kind of acted like Chuck had money of his own. So I was curious on that, and I was surprised that they kind of leaned into Lonnie kind of being a cult leader at one point in the movie, questioning that. So there were some interesting takes in the movie too.
Mhm.
I just assumed Chuck got his money, and the way they told it anyway. I didn't read anything online about the real guy and his finances, but I just assumed that once it became really big, like, he proved those naysayers wrong, and there were so many people coming, they had to put up a tent, that, they are contributing tithes. That's just what I assumed.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
maybe not. I also, Lonnie being somewhat of a cult leader, I don't know if I would describe him as becoming somewhat of a cult leader, but maybe. I mean, it relates to, maybe that's another way of describing what I was talking about, where he starts feeding into his ego. I thought that scene where he's arguing with his wife is incredible, because I was yelling at the TV like I do. Listen to yourself. Like, what would Jesus say about this? Nobody
Yeah.
can do what I do. Shut up. This isn't about you. This isn't about you. And I'm glad they had a character voice that later, Chuck's wife saying, this has never been about you or Lonnie or any one person. And thank you, because that somebody needed to say that to Lonnie. And yet at the same time, like you said, he's still being used. And he still presumably went off to another place and helped to grow other churches, and was still used, even with all those human flaws.
Yeah.
Just amazing.
Yeah, you look at, again, you look at scripture, you look at all the different people, David, Samson, you can just keep going. They had tremendous flaws, and yet God greatly used them in that. So, just because you are anointed or have a special calling from the Lord doesn't mean that those people, again, if they don't submit things to the Lord and truly consecrate their life to God, won't stumble with things.
Yeah.
Do you believe, I know we come from different backgrounds, and, I don't know as much about Catholicism, or you're Pentecostal, right, Michelle?
Yeah.
Dr. Smith. So do you though believe that, some people told me when I first became a Christian, they were like, so you're going to withstand spiritual attacks now, because the devil didn't care much about you when you were off pursuing truth through alcohol or whatever, all these ways that weren't leading anywhere. And then I kind of brushed that aside, like, I don't even know if I believe in all. And now I definitely believe in that. And I've also heard, of course, pastors are under immense spiritual attack if they're doing a good job for the Lord, if they're being used mightily. Do you guys believe in that, like spiritual attacks?
Absolutely. I mean, look at this. I mean, Paul even uses war imagery. We wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities and powers. If you are an army general, like, you're going to take out the army general, like, of the opposing side. You want to take out the leader, because if you can take out the leader, the people are just going to be in disarray. And you see that anytime a pastor has had a public disgrace, whether they publicly, it came out they had an affair, some of these big mega churches that had these situations. I mean, it impacts the people horribly. Like, it can really impact. Yes, it can really impact those sheep. I mean, if we want to use biblical language, the sheep, because their shepherd got taken out. And I absolutely believe that. And that's not to say the devil is going to have spiritual attacks for everyone in that church, but definitely there is a pressure for ministers' children, I think, have special attacks on them. But I believe so.
I mean, we see it especially within the Catholic Church, because the sex abuse scandal. I mean, the number of people who have left the Catholic Church, and that's like the number one issue on their mind. It's palpable, right? And so just the number of people who fell away from not just the church, but also from their faith because of something like that. It is, again, a very, very powerful tool that can be used, right? Using the faults that are already there, because that's the one thing too that sometimes I think people maybe misconstrue when we talk about spiritual attacks. We're not saying here that we have no or that the people who have done these things have no control of themselves or anything like that. It's more so that it's them giving in to the temptations that are being placed, right? And I think one great example of this would also be, there's a biblical foundation for this as well, the book of Job, right? It's clear spiritual attack and spiritual warfare against him. And he's the example of how to persist, right? How to not give in, how to not to allow for the terrible things that happen in your life to allow you to fall away from your faith and fall away in your trust in God. But we absolutely still see that today. And I think I think one of the last times that we were together, we were talking about nefarious. And so I think it's, some ties in there, right? Where that is showing, in a very real way that these spiritual battles can happen in very explicit ways through, possession, exorcism and stuff like that. But then also, again, in this regular everyday life, right? All the sins, every single one of us is a sinner. We've mentioned this previously. And that means we all struggle with a vice. And Satan will try to use those vices to get us to fall. The further that we get to fall, we take more and more people with us.
Absolutely.
What about
I'm trying
you?
not to talk. I'm trying to let someone else talk.
Yeah.
I don't have anything else to add. That's the thing. You guys are dropping knowledge bombs, some wisdom. I'm just like, yep, okay, yep, I feel that.
Well, let me read a couple of these then. Deranged Lunatic for $4.99. Thank you so much. Says, in my church, we always pray before the service that the Holy Spirit is welcomed and will have its way throughout the service. I used to, when I was little, I was raised Southern Baptist. I'm from what I recall, we would do something similar in the Southern Baptist church, but we don't do a prayer like that in the church I go to currently. And then your average patriot nerve for $10. Thank you. Says, I can't stay because I haven't watched the movie yet, though I own it. I appreciate all of you for getting this together for this type of show. May the Lord bless you and keep you all. Well, thank you for tuning in. We're spoiling it for Odin right now.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not really the kind of movie that spoilers are going to ruin in any way.
Yeah,
it's based off of a historical story, so I mean,
yeah.
It's not the exact same as saying, like if you're watching like Pearl Harbor or something, like spoilers, maybe not that far, but it's still it's like on the same, it's a similar level where it's like,
I will say, for anyone listening, speaking of spiritual attacks, something that I have prayed for many years. I mean, just one of the things I prayed is that I specifically prayed, Lord, teach me to walk softly before you. And what I mean by that is to walk in a way that I'm sensitive enough again, walk softly, not be prideful enough that I think I fully know what I'm doing, but walk in a way that I can be sensitive to the Lord, because the Lord will show us when there's a trap. I mean, if the enemy puts a trap in front of you, the Lord will, if we allow him, lead us around those traps. I mean, that's in the Lord's Prayer. Lead me away from temptation and deliver me from evil. Anyways, that's just something that I've learned to pray, just that the Lord would teach me to walk softly, in the sense, again, that I can hear his voice. God can speak to me and stop me if I'm being too proud, if that is creeping in my life, or whatever's creeping in, get my attention. Because God, I believe this, whether it's Alani Frisbee or whoever, God will deal with us privately before God allows us to be embarrassed publicly. The people that have fallen publicly have ignored God's behind the scenes dealing with them time and time again.
Wow. That's an interesting way to think about it. Yes. Yeah.
I like that.
I do too. I thank you for sharing that prayer. I learned so much from you, and I like hearing what other people pray, because sometimes it's like there's one that you might pray. Something's talking to me. I think something just said my battery's very low.
Battery low.
I don't know what that was.
Low.
Oh, it's creeping me out because my husband's at the gym. He's talking to me. But no, there's some prayers that you do over and over, or I find that I do. For a long time, my go-to, like before, because I had a lot of fear about when I first started doing a podcast about this kind of public speaking, and I would do a prayer to kill my ego. And man, will God, like, in painful ways, try to help you do that. like maybe painful ways. But, I have different go-tos at different times where I found that I tend to stick with one, and then I'll have new ones that I bring in. But I like that one as a, help me to walk softly in front of you.
Well, and I think it's important also that, a lot of us, when you go into church, a lot of people are asking for their prayer request. You're giving out your prayer request for other people to pray for you. I think it's also important to remember to always be praying for your pastor or for your priest,
Yes.
and for what they're bringing you.
Yes.
And not just them, but the whole staff.
Mhm.
Because I think sometimes people forget to be praying for them because they think, okay, well, that's the pastor. He doesn't need prayer, but does.
Need more than anybody else in many instances.
Yes.
Big
And
target.
And times right now, I would say, world leaders, which I don't do as often as I should, but lately I've been, praying for world leaders, praying for people with any kind of cultural or political influence. And your pastor, that's a great one. So
start local.
I find myself connected typically with, more recently, my kind of go-to has been, it's an Eastern prayer of the church. I think it's like Eastern Orthodox, Eastern Catholic churches use it a lot. It's called the Jesus prayer. And it's Jesus Christ, Son of God, have mercy on me, a sinner.
yeah.
And so like they actually have, I forget, I think it's called the Chatka, I think. So, most people know what like a rosary is. It's kind of similar in a way where there's like a certain number of knots on it in that instance. Sometimes they can be beads. And usually it's either 33 to represent the number of years of Christ. Sometimes there's 100 or 150 to mirror the Psalms. But the mindset is that you will say that prayer. Your goal is to say that prayer a certain number of times every day. And it's because it comes from the spirituality of I should always be praying, right? Always pray always. And so one of the things that you can do is obviously, personal prayers, but that's also just a really easy one of just, Jesus Christ, Son of God, have mercy on me, a sinner, because it just covers the whole gambit of, our relationship with God.
Yeah. Yes. Oh, I brought that one up, Odin, our last one,
Yeah.
because I had started praying that because, in fact, I was reading a book from, he actually was a Catholic priest, Henry Newman, or no, I botched his last name.
John Henry Newman?
I think so.
Okay.
He was a professor too. Are we speaking of the same person?
I don't remember if he was a professor.
I'll look him up. I'll look him up and let you know. But yeah, he brought that prayer up, and really too, he presented it, which I so agreed with, of it just beginning to train your heart and mind to, to call upon the Lord for mercy in life. And I mean, I think we all need that.
Mm-hmm.
Michael has a super chat that I've found this to be true as well. Thank you, Michael, for $4.99. He says, our friend with 2 autistic kids said she always prayed for patience, but then realized God was giving her opportunities to practice patience. And thank you for that. That's the way it tends to go for me sometimes. I like to think God has a sense of humor with me or with my husband, where, you might pray for this actually happened. I hope you won't mind me sharing this. My husband had prayed for patience. He told me this right after he prayed for patience, he got a text from me that made him upset. And it was right in that moment. It was like later on he laughed about it. He was like, and then he said, and I blew it. I didn't have patience in that moment. And afterwards it was like, oh, right. I just told you I wanted patience. You gave me the opportunity to practice it and I didn't. And then, but if you recognize that, it's like, it does make you laugh. It's like, oh, okay, God, you're a jokester. I get it.
Don't pray unless you're ready for the answer.
Yeah. Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, I don't want to keep you guys too long tonight. I have a couple of little things we could talk about, or we could just get to my big question and then anything you guys still want to hit. Let's do the big question. This is the most meaningful thing I think on my list. How do we spark the kind of Jesus revolution that happened in the 70s that they depict in this film? And we talked about at the beginning, people filling that God-shaped hole with a lot of things. And I think you might all agree. I think people are filling it not just with drugs and alcohol, like in the film, but they're filling it with, woke ideology. They're filling it with gender identity and all these different kinds of identity. How do we show them, like in the movie, the best drug is Jesus?
I think, well, first of all, we have to meet people where they are. And we also have to, I say we, and I've only been a Christian for like a year and a half, and I'm still learning. But I've gotten so into apologetics. And from all of the books that I've been reading, there seems to be this ongoing theme that a lot of the top apologetics are saying, we have to adapt to the way we evangelize to people just because of how times are changing. Not try to skew the gospel and nitpick and change it to appeal to people, but in the way that we approach, I think it has to change. And in the same way, I look at like a social justice warrior and wonder, why are they involved in that? What is it about their life that they're missing or that they're seeking that's leading them to that? And then use that and present an alternative, which is Jesus Christ. So I think it's a combination of, like I said, adapting and meeting people where they are, and not necessarily using a lot of, like, from my experience, I try to dumb down my language or not use Christianese so much, because there's a lot of language that, at least for me, when someone used to say, hey, Jesus loves you, that was a foreign phrase to me. It's like a foreign catchphrase. Like, I don't know what are you talking about? Like, and even like little words like sin, it's like, yeah, we should talk about sin, but like in the way that we present it, I think it needs to, because not everyone understands what those words are,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So that's what I think.
Yeah. I think one of the ways, and it's the most difficult one, is we have to start, all of us, living the faith,
Yeah.
because that is how most people have any interaction with faith or any introduction to faith. It's not from necessarily, being the preacher on the street corner, talking and screaming or just speaking from the Bible, though I think that does speak to some people, right? I think that there's a place for that type of evangelization, but I think that the most effective kind is going to be the way that we live, right? Because how did Christ himself, there's a concept in the church that developed under St. John Paul II of the new evangelization. But there has been some that have said, actually, what we need is the old evangelization. We actually need to return to what Christ himself did, because what did he do? Right? He offered his hand, right? The woman who was caught in adultery, what did he do? He stood in the way. He got in the way of these stones, protecting her, and said, where did they go? Right? Who is there? He's like, there's no one, Lord. And it's like, does anyone condemn you? No one. It's like, neither do I. Come and follow me, but don't sin again. Right? So we need to be able to live out the faith. And I think the best example for us to look to is Christ. And I think sometimes we also kind of forget that, because we're very used to our maybe our denomination or just the people that we're around and how they live and how they talk. But sometimes we just kind of need to go to the source, right? Just go to Christ himself and say, how did Christ do it? How did Christ, and how was he so effective? And can that still be impactful and still be effective? And I think yes, there's something about someone who's living out the faith that's just so much more tangible and so much more impactful than just having the right words to say necessarily.
Absolutely. I agree with everything that was said. And yeah, I mean, this movie is about a revival, a movement that happens. And I think ultimately only God, only the Holy Spirit can truly orchestrate what happened in that movement. But revival begins with each one of us. And sometimes it's like the words in Revelation, you've lost your first love. Like when Jesus says that to the church, and we as Christians, sometimes just going through life, we begin to lose that passion, that love for the Lord.
Yes.
And it is on us, like us and God, for our passion to be renewed. I looked up one of my heroes in the faith, John Wesley. He's got a famous quote. Of course, he started the great. I mean, I say he. I mean, the Lord was behind it, but he went on to lead the Great Awakenings. And he's got a quote: "Light yourself on fire with passion, and people will come for miles to watch you burn."
Mm.
And it's just like that. That's what the world needs. Like, not these dead Christians like you see at the beginning of the movie that are so, only care about what someone looks like, but people that truly, that passion's there, that love for the Lord is there. That draws people.
What's that verse? You just made me think of that verse, Michelle. For your God is a consuming fire.
Yes, and Hebrews, because our God is a consuming fire.
Yes.
I agree with everything everybody else said, obviously. But going this late, she almost stole my thunder. But I would say doing stuff like what we're doing right now. I mean, we're going into an area that we know there's a lot of Christians, in this little corner of YouTube, but there are plenty that aren't. So maybe even doing a show like this, that's not going to likely spark a revival, but it is a way to evangelize without being, too in your face with it. People can come in if they want. The show's for anybody. I mean, it's not just for Christians to come in and watch this show. We'll be talking about different things, but just coming at it from our perspective as Christians. So I think doing stuff like that, putting yourself out there is part of, sparking something.
It is. And I know I'll just reiterate for anyone listening, like, atheists are welcome in the chat. I see some atheists right now. and I want everyone to feel like we want everyone to feel welcome asking questions or whatever, however you'd like to contribute in the chat. So I love this. I love that everybody wanted to come together and do this. And Michelle, I'm so grateful you recommended this movie. Should I show this clip you sent me of Kelsey Grammer talking about the movie?
Well, I don't want you to get claimed.
Oh, I get claimed all the time. We'll see. Okay, so he's talking about. I haven't watched this yet. You sent it to us in the chat.
They watched the scene that made me cry, where Lonnie is telling him, sitting at his kitchen table and telling him how these people are searching for something. They are sheep without a shepherd. That whole speech. That's what they've just watched.
Okay.
That's a scene from Jesus Revolution. Tell us about it.
It's a nice movie.
Yeah, it looks beautiful.
Really
I mean,
sweet.
you're tearing up.
I see you getting emotional. What are you feeling?
That's so awkward to ask, by the way.
I love this movie. I really love it. When we first saw the first cut, sat down in our home, and Kate saw it. She said, "Oh my God, it's the best thing I've ever done." She started crying. But he's a man looking for his own faith and finds it as well. A man whose church is empty and he can't get traction, and he's starting to think he's going to be fired from his job as a pastor. And this hippie comes into his life, and he finds new purpose, and started a movement that is still going.
So
I mean,
this
it's
is a true
extraordinary.
story.
Yeah, it's a true story.
You're
Chuck
playing
Smith
Chuck Smith.
is the guy I played. He died in 2014, I think. But the number of people who came up and said, "Oh, you're playing Chuck Smith? Oh, I listen to him all the time." Or and I say, he married us. Or I was baptized by Chuck Smith. You can see this light in their eyes. And
Oh,
Aw.
Yeah, Ryan Seacrest making it awkward. What are you feeling right now? As if, oh man,
Yeah.
And then he has this whole
answer
like,
that question. Is
let me get real
struggling not
close
to
and-
cry?
Ryan Seacrest, that's the kind of question you always see when it's like some girl that's just been, saved from captivity from some serial killer or whatever, and they're like, "How do you feel?" Stop it. Like a Nancy Grace kind of, I don't
oh
know.
gosh,
You doing okay?
What are you feeling? No, what was so touching is I know he's gone on to make multiple statements. Like, I don't know what his faith was before this movie, but like he claims to be a Christian now, and he definitely seems like it really impacted his life.
You can see it.
Yes.
I mean, the emotion
yeah.
right there. Thank you so much for sending me that.
You're welcome.
Yeah, I was kind of wondering how many of the actors in this happen to be Christian, because it doesn't seem like a role you would take if you didn't have some degree of faith.
Right.
Well, the guy who plays Lonnie is the same guy who plays Jesus in The Chosen, and I know he's a devout Catholic.
Yeah.
Okay.
I thought he did a great job. I thought he was funny. There were a lot of funny moments.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because my only knowledge of him has been him portraying Jesus in The Chosen, and so I had not seen him in really anything else, and so kind of seeing the character that he put on for that, I was like, oh, this guy has range. That's good to see, because you never know, right? When you know someone just from one role, but when you see them in doing something a little bit different, you're like, okay, this is good. I'm glad to see this.
Has anyone here watched The Chosen?
Few clips.
I started it, haven't gotten to go all the way through it yet.
I've been meaning to. Did you like it, GOTHIX?
I like it. I know there's a lot of criticisms about the show, particularly with how the fact that you're having an actor portray Jesus, and how a lot of people, they can't disassociate the actor from thinking that that's actually Jesus.
Yeah.
And I think there might be something to that, because when I was watching Jesus Revolution, my mind kept thinking this is the guy that plays Jesus in The Chosen, and it was annoying.
And it's funny because I had not, as I said, I had not known anything about this movie, really. I didn't know it was based on a true story. And so one of the reasons why I dragged my feet to watch it, like, it really wasn't until the stream idea came up that I even started it. And of course I planned to finish it. But what I thought beforehand was like, oh, it's got Jonathan Rubin in it, so it's just another Jesus movie. Okay, I'm okay. And I didn't realize, like, oh no, it's actually about this historical movement and stuff and everything. So
It's really good. I will say, if you're one of the people who thinks it's going to be cheesy, I thought it was going to be cheesy. It's good. It doesn't matter. It's the good kind of cheese. You'll enjoy it.
Well,
Yeah,
and
it's
you know
not Kirk
what? Like,
Cameron cheese.
what Marvel movie hasn't been cheesy in the last 10 years? So you know what? We can deal with a little cheese here.
Yes. Okay, so I'm not sure what this is in response to. Mark for $2.
That was the name of the.
Yeah, that's the scholar I was referring to.
Yeah.
Henry Nowen, is that how you say it?
Yes, he was a Catholic scholar and I believe priest. And yeah, I've loved everything of his I've read.
And then Mark for $5. Thank you, Mark. Says, it's great seeing GOTHIX. I watched her from early on and felt her sincere pursuit of truth would lead naturally to God. It was wonderful to see.
Thanks, Mark. Yeah, that was wild. that whole process, it's so weird having it documented, but I mean, it is what it is. But yeah, it's interesting.
But I mean, kind of stuff like that, it kind of goes back to the movie of like Alani Frisbee, whether it's you, GOTHIX, or or Keri. Both of you kind of on camera kind of kept finding the Lord and then aren't ashamed to promote that at this point with the audiences that you already had. And that's awesome and incredible. And God will use that.
No, absolutely. I think it's just I look at my past self. I'm like, man, I was cringe. I can't stand it.
That's always gonna. I had a moment today, GOTHIX, where something came up from my past, the old self, taking off the old self, putting on the new self, and I had this pang of shame. And I talked to my husband about it, and it was like, yeah, just this thing came up, this thing happened, and I remember this thing I did, in my old life, and that's so not me. But I think God gives you those moments once in a while, or gives them to me anyway, to just remind me of how grateful I am.
It's very humbling.
Yes. It's very humbling. Very humbling. And then I had one from Channel Julio. So maybe people can weigh in on this. Thank you, Channel Julio, for the super chat, 1999. He says, I'm asking for some wisdom here. I want to follow the guidance that our battle is with powers and principalities, but I really, really, really want to battle with the flesh and blood that I come against at work. Your thoughts? That's very human.
Yeah, it is. I mean, I would need to know the situation. I'll say this. I like to add that though we fight not against flesh and blood, I will say that sometimes principalities work through personalities. And you have to deal with that.
Yeah, I feel like I would need more specific information as well, but the struggle though is real.
Yeah.
The struggle is real to not what's the thing it made me think of first? Well, it made me think of the verses about how God will fight for you and all you have to do is remain silent, like those. Okay, that kind of verse, it's hard because sometimes we want to defend ourselves, or we want to be out there. If you feel like something's, you said in the workplace, something's unfair, it's happening to you in the workplace. I don't know exactly what it is, but there's this sort of, I want to go in and be the fighter and do this. And I sometimes in my life, I felt God saying to me, no, I'm telling you to stop. Like, let me handle this thing that's out of your control.
Well, even a story I happened to be reading through Exodus in the Old Testament, and I was at the story where Korah and them lead the rebellion against Moses. And what does Moses do? He gets down and he kneels down. And the point of him kneeling in front of his enemies is that now they're dealing with God, basically. It was kind of like, you're not dealing with me, you're dealing with God. And God swallows up, literally makes the ground swallow them whole. And basically just saying to all of us that if we will submit those things to the Lord, that God will deal with our enemies. If we stay true to God, God will have our back, basically.
Yeah. And just to think back to the words of not just the prayer that Christ gave us, but also just the words of Christ himself, right? That thy will be done, and to try to, this is the toughest thing we can do as human beings, is just to entrust ourselves completely to God's providence and recognize that whatever comes into our life, either it has been given to us as a gift or it has been allowed to happen to us. And it's been allowed to happen to us because ultimately God knows that we can handle it. The old adage is, God does not give us anything that we cannot handle. It may not feel like we can handle it. It may not feel like we can get through it. But I was, when you had mentioned, you were mentioning a quote earlier about like fire, and it reminded me of a quote from St. Catherine of Siena, who says, if you are what you should be, you will set the world ablaze.
Yes.
And just that if we are truly who we are called to be, if we are truly, becoming and are acting in our regular everyday life, children of God, no matter what struggles we're going through, we will be able to get through it, right? Whatever God is going to will is going to happen, right? And all we can do is entrust whatever our struggles are to him. And the other quote that she has is, it's only through shadows that one comes to know the light. And I think that's another way of kind of looking at it as well.
I'm gonna need you to inbox the group chat these quotes. I wrote a paper in my PhD program on her, so I like it.
I'll send you the site that I found them at.
Well, and the thing is, pray about it, and it may be a situation where God is telling you that that's not the place you're supposed to be anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
And there are different ways of handling it.
that's a great example. One of the gig jobs I had when I first moved to Texas, I kept this particular one. I didn't want to be there anymore. There were political things. They found out it didn't like Beto, and it wasn't going well. And but I kept praying that I was like praying for a new job opportunity at the time, and then, but I wasn't doing anything, and I wasn't, you know, I was capable of searching and do it, but I was kind of just waiting, like God will just make something happen. God, give me a new job opportunity. So then God had me fired.
All right.
Okay, now I guess I have to do something, and then I did. I found another one within like 3 weeks. It was like, I could have done that the whole time, but it wasn't until it became pressing. And yeah, I got fired because I didn't like Beto, essentially. That's what it
How
came
dare
down to.
you.
Seems like a rational
But-
reason.
yeah. Yeah. But I shouldn't have been there as long as I was. That was the thing. That was
Yeah.
the moral of that story. And also because sometimes I found that I will pray for something the way I used to pray, and I've changed this, or I'm trying to change this, is I used to pray for God to do something miraculous without thinking I had to get off my butt and like contribute. Sort of like do this thing, change the situation for me. And it's like,
I think all of us want that Paul moment in our life, right? We all want like why can't I just be struck by light just to know you're there, right? We all think we kind of hunger for that because again, we're human. It's this natural reaction. But that's also one of the tough things, right? Is that most of us are not going to get that that moment that or at least we're not going to get it in the way that we want or the way that we expect.
Keri, your story just touched me because it's like, I mean, I think anyone who really wants, who pray, think of the Lord's Prayer, let your kingdom come, let your will be done. Anyone who truly wants God's will to be done, like you're praying for it, and sometimes you can be afraid you could miss it. But I've really come to realize it's like if you truly want God's will, you're not going to miss it. Because say in the case of you, God's kind of thinking, well, why is she not doing anything here? But then I think of the psalm, the psalm that says, man makes his plans, but God establishes his steps. And it's like, you can sit there and not do anything, but because you did pray and want God's will, God's like, okay, well, let me help you out here. Like at the end of the day, his will was done.
he did answer my prayers,
Yeah,
and he
like
got me out of that toxic
and point being, like, you didn't really miss anything. Like, he got you out of there when you needed to.
It just wasn't like the smooth, like, let's have something else waiting in the wings.
Yeah,
Like,
no.
it was
God
funny.
usually doesn't do it the smoothest way, I found, but
No.
Like that episode of The Simpsons where I think it was Homer is poking the dog with the stick going, do something. Come on.
So just a couple things in the chat, and then we can wrap this up. I know everybody's busy lives to return to. Dan Trainer mentions the verse being slow to speak, hard for most everyone.
Mm-hmm.
Just a couple things I saw here that I wanted to highlight. This one, John says, God's approach is always individual based. Maybe we have to try to do the same.
Yep.
I agree.
Mm-hmm.
And Nomo says, I think we start by listening. This is a broken world filled with broken people, even those who we think are doing well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Brett Humans says his church started preaching left-wing politics instead of the Bible.
Oof.
Ooh.
So he's churchless for the time being.
Yeah,
I'll
I've been
pray that-
watching a lot of debates on YouTube right now about the progressive Christian movement.
Lovely.
It's yeah.
Sounds exciting.
Well, there's
What
quite
kind
a
of
few of them out
debates?
there.
Like where they're
well,
saying it's
There's a guy named Daniel Robertson who's been doing stuff for about a year now. He is a gay man that basically has twisted the scripture into basically God will accept anything that he says, and doesn't believe that scripture is actually God breathed, but he's a pastor. I mean, they're twisting everything to make it work with their logic rather than their logic changing to what the Bible says.
Yeah.
It's pretty wild. You'll have to check a few of them out.
I will.
Is that the guy that was preaching a sermon and the lightning struck the church and the lights went off?
Wouldn't surprise me, but I
feel
don't
like
know.
that was the same guy. And then he said that was not a sign from God, which I found hilarious.
I don't know anything about this. I have to look this up.
I feel like I know who you're talking about.
Yeah. He's been all over the place lately. I mean, he does a lot of podcasts.
Okay, I have to see what I think about this guy. Maybe we could do.
And they've actually named it progressive Christianity. So I mean, it is a movement out there.
It's to the point.
Is that the same group that I saw this floating around the other day? It's like the creed. I think we're like the external people are calling it like the creed to wokeness, but it's like we believe. It's like basically like it's in the line of the Apostles' Creed, where it's like we believe in the non-binary God, and it's like
What?
It's awful. It's really
It's
bad.
bad.
I've seen a bit of that on Twitter. Yeah.
It's like, ooh, no.
If any of you guys are going to be in Texas anytime soon, I want you to be. We're planning another comedy video shoot for my channel, and there's one that's like a progressive Jesus one. I really would love for you all to be in it. So just
That
you know.
sounds so fun.
One final thing, I have to give it up for Murder Knits. Please check out her channel if you're a knitter and you like true crime. She made me this hat, and I forgot to mention at the beginning, this cat hat. And I just love it. Thank you so much, Murder Knits. This was part of the Blocked magazine. They're trying to reclaim the cat hat because it wasn't always a woke pattern, and so this was one of the patterns they had in the magazine for Blocked, which is, again, you should check out Blocked if you're a crafter. Okay, that's it. Any final thoughts, guys?
No, I enjoyed the panel, enjoyed discussing this with you, and I really enjoyed this movie. So if you haven't seen it, I definitely recommend it. It's on Netflix right now.
Yeah, everybody should go check it out. It's a fun movie. I mean, an hour and a half of nothing that's going to offend you,
Yeah.
unless you need offending.
Yeah, if you're offended by it, I question you, but it will make you cry. And if you don't cry, I will also question you.
Exactly.
At least we know if you're a lady, you'll cry. My husband at the end was kind of laughing, like pretend crying just to mess with me. And then he looked over and was like, "You're crying again, really?" Like he was like, I was thinking, because the whole time I couldn't. It's like the waterworks. I don't know.
The end was so sweet with we got a real love story in the movie.
Did.
Yeah.
We did. Anyway,
I can't wait to finish it because
he enjoyed it.
I've been liking it so far. So
yeah,
That's good.
yeah.
Well, thank you guys for coming. I hope you have a good rest of your week. If you are a regular viewer here at Deprogrammed, we're not doing pop culture tonight. We decided to do it tomorrow night so that we wouldn't have 2 live streams back to back. So I hope we'll see you guys tomorrow at our regular time, 8 o'clock. And we're talking about the history of goth. And one last one from Selsworth. Thank you, Selsworth, for the super chat. He says the most important topics was discussed today. Thanks for hanging out. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Oh, wait a minute. We didn't do the. I'm sorry. I'm spacey today. Just tell people really quickly where they can find you. I feel so.
Oh.
And that's the final thing. Then we go.
They can Google.
Start with special guest GOTHIX.
Oh, you can find me on YouTube, GOTHIX TV. I also stream on Twitch sometimes, just GOTHIX. And yeah, I am on Twitter, but I hardly say anything because Twitter's a dumpster fire. And yeah, but thanks for having me on.
Thanks for coming.
And,
You want to go?
Okay. Yes, I'm Michelle. You can find me at Force of Light Entertainment on YouTube. If you want my Christian podcast, just do the Force of Light podcast on. In fact, I'll put it in the chat. That's on all places podcasts are. But that's it.
Nice. You can find me at OMB Reviews on YouTube, Odyssey, Rumble, Twitter, all the different places, and I'm slowly getting in the process of making content again. I had a a baby girl almost 4 weeks ago, so I've been, doing that thing, and so I've fallen away a little bit from everything. But I always appreciate my people because they are always very understanding and recognize, family coming first. And last night I actually had my first stream in almost 4 weeks, and it was great. So yeah, check me out, OMB Reviews.
And I named his daughter.
You did?
Yes.
Uh-huh.
Her YouTube name, yes, her YouTube name. She was a major factor in the YouTube name. Yes.
She has a YouTube channel already?
Yeah, you know it.
Kidding.
Yeah.
And I will be on with Comics Division on Rumble for Yelling at Parked Cars in just a few minutes. And then later tonight, at midnight Central, I'm on the midweek hump with the Shagsworth for the after show on Rumble. So then I've got a channel, but all I do on there is game every now and then. So
You guys go check
to
out
be here.
Yelling at Parked Cars tonight. You've got a busy night, Brahma.
Yeah, it'll be a long one, but fun.
Well, thank you guys. And thanks for hanging out with us in the chat. And we will see you later.
See you.
Bye.
Bye.